Recording started.
Hello and welcome to the Hero's Word. My name is Andre Greenidge, and today I am ecstatic to announce a new friend and a really cool guest, Mr. Hoche Anderson, who has been working in comics for 25 plus years, and he has got an epic story coming out this October starring none other than Luke Cage. Say hello to everybody, sir.
Andre, thank you so much for having me again, man. Appreciate it.
No problem, no problem. As I said, you've got a career that has spanned since probably the early 90s. You've worked with almost every publisher, plus, I would say almost every genre. And now this is going to be your first full Marvel comic, and it's Luke Cage, City of Fire.
Yes, sir. Very excited.
All right. So I would like to tell you folks a little bit about some of the phenomenal work that Mr. Anderson has done. Now, some of you will know it, some of you might not have seen it before, but I guarantee you're going to want to check out some of his works, as it is going to open up your eyes to what comic book storytelling can be. Here's one of the books that he is most famous for, and it is King. And it is, of course, that is Martin Luther King. It's a story there. Now, this one here, I personally really like this one. This one was called Godhead. It's volume 1, and it is a great sci-fi, but it also has like this really cool premise and message. There's a lot of depth to this book. Really, really like it. Hoche can switch gears right into the Scream Queen genre with Sand and Fury, a really cool adventure. And hopefully you guys can notice, even just from some of these covers, this man's got a lot of different styles, a lot of versatility. He not only draws, but he writes, and he's been doing it for a whole long time. Check out this one. This is going way back to the early 90s with Milestone Comics. This is Wise Son. Again, great stories. These stories have depth. They have characters with great feeling, and modern stuff too, because currently you're working with Chapter House producing some of our good old Captain Canuck. So can you give us a little bit of your background and your inspiration in the field of comics?
Yeah, I've been in the game since wow, it's hard to say, but since 1990s when I first broke in. I was 20 years old. I actually started to do some professional work a couple of years before that. My very first pro gig was when I was 18, way the hell back in 1988 for Kamiko Comics.
Nice.
I was so excited. I got this 10-page Grendel story written by Matt Wagner, of course. And it was a thrilling moment to go from drawing in my room all night, you know, and just wishing and dreaming and scheming and planning to finally like get that first professional gig. Didn't actually make it to the stands for another, I think, 6 years.
Oh, wow.
But it was still the first one. Then the second gig was another Grendel gig about 6 months later. They liked what I had to do and what I had done, and they invited me back to do a larger story. And that one finally hit the stands, I guess, around fall of 1990. Mm-hmm. And it was off to the races from there.
That's so cool, and I think it's very fitting that like you're starting off a book with Grendel. Like I said, like your art style, a lot of times call it film noir, but it's a lot of, you know, heavy shadows, angles. It's just, there's something like, I find it that it's vibrant but also stunning at the same time, because it's just making you look at these figures and characters in such a way that, again, perfect for Grendel. So let's move on and talk about some of the guys that inspired you. Like, who were you reading as that young 18-year-old and stuff for in the realm of comics?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky because I sort of came of age in the 1980s, just when comic books were starting to go from they're kind of in the 1970s. There was a lot of talk in the industry that it wasn't going to survive into the 1980s because the sales were nosediving. the art form was sort of stagnating, at least in North America, and there was a real fear that within 5-6 years that the industry was going to cease to exist, at least as it existed as a mainstream force in the 70s and in the early 80s. And then luckily there was this kind of renaissance that came along. I think a lot of mainstream cartoonists were starting to absorb the work of Japanese cartoonists and especially European cartoonists, and they were starting to bring those influences into their work. They were slipping them slowly by the editors. I don't know if Jim Shooter was much of a an appreciator of the stuff that was going on in Europe, but the cartoonists certainly were. And slowly those influences started to coalesce into this explosion that happened in the mid 1980s with the independent market. And the movement that started in the independent market sort of graduated to the mainstream,
right,
which resulted in works like, one of the very first ones that I read that was different from the monthly newsstand comics that I read was a thing called The Death of Captain Marvel. It was a 48-page Marvel graphic novel, trade paperback format, glossy paper, glossy thick paper, painted art, written and drawn by Jim Starlin. Absolutely the great Jim Starlin. And it was about Captain Marvel, who would kick the ass out of cosmic invaders and was indestructible. Well, suddenly he's like faced with an enemy from within. He's got cancer and he dies at the end of the book. And I had never read anything like that before. I didn't know that that was possible in comics. You follow that up a few months later with Frank Miller's Ronin, which was this bizarre 6-issue sci-fi. There you go, sci-fi, samurai high adventure, and it was unlike anything that I had ever seen. To this day, it's still one of the more unique stories that I've ever read in the medium, and it really opened the doors in my mind of what was possible in comic books. And I was already pretty committed to the art form before. I was just doing it all the time. But after I came across works like that, I really felt like this is just where I needed to be. So it was guys like Frank Miller, people like the Hernandez brothers, who I've mentioned 1,001 times. People like
Love and Rockets, right?
Love and Rockets was huge for me. Love and Rockets was an amazing book because, again, it showed me yet another aspect of what comics could be. Even though Love and Rockets started out as somewhat fantasy based, it was like a little bit like heavy metal. I know they had a lot of influences from mainstream superhero comics of the time. The influences that they had from outside the superhero mainstream started to dominate their work. And next thing you know, you were just getting these incredible surreal stories, or slice of life stories, or mainstream stories, at least on the surface, but which were approached and had a point of view that were completely unlike the mainstream, totally subverting those comic book tropes that we'd all grown up with. So stuff like that really impacted me and showed me what the medium could be. And I've been following a lot of these same creators like ever since.
All the way. Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you talk about it because, we are about at that same age where we remember this kind of shift in comics to basically show people that comics are more than just pow, punch, zap. And these storytellers changed the art form and modernized it in a way, like you said, it saved it right up until the early 90s, where we then had that big shift with Image Comics and the power of the independent creator. No longer would Marvel and DC be the only voices or the biggest voices in comics. They were other voices to be heard. And I think that is, it was such a monumental change to comics. We still see the very influences of those people that you met. But also, I think if we can bring it back around to your work, the type of stories that you tell, they have so much meaning underneath it. Like you said, it's not just on the surface. It might be a sci-fi. On the surface, it might be a superhero, but it's not quite that. So, can you elaborate a little bit more about how what you bring to the table when you're storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, my influences were, as much as they were comic book based, they were also, I was also highly influenced by novels and by playwrights and by screenwriters and by directors and by real life. I was always interested in translating, not on a one-to-one basis, like, in terms of doing autobiography per se, but I was always interested in bringing in the complexity that I saw just in my real, day-to-day life into my storytelling as much as possible. Um, so my stuff has always been an attempt to kind of marry, I mean, comic books, the things that attract people to comic books initially are the pulpy aspect of them, the sensational aspect of them, and
Mhm.
I still respond to those things, and I don't want to divorce them from my storytelling. I think those are good ways just to excite people and to engage them in the ideas that you're trying to present them with. But you have to also have ideas. I've always wanted to, as much as my stuff sometimes can veer into fantasy, I've always wanted it to be grounded in the real. You know what I mean? And because I think those are the stories that are going to connect with people on a deeper level now, and those are the stories that are going to remain relevant down the road. So yeah, I always try to ground them as much as I possibly can, and to just show the complexity that exists in the real world.
Right on. And I think that's just the perfect segue into talking about Luke Cage. I'm going to bring up the cover again. Great art here. City,
Phenomenal cover. I love
yeah,
that cover.
and it's City of Fire. And I'm gonna let you tell the synopsis in your own words, and then we'll dive into I think why it's very, very important for this story to be told now and for it to be coming out now. So
Well, the original impetus for this actually was I started working with Marvel about, coming up on a year ago. We started just talking initially, and I've always loved Daredevil, and my first thought was I wanted to pitch them a Daredevil action epic
mhm.
in which in which Matt Murdock does not appear. It is strictly a Daredevil story, and it's a story where a character is revealed through action. All right. Oh my God, my cat! Every time I'm doing one of these, my cat has to go in and out. Just give me one second.
No problem. So let's pop up this image again here so you can see a close up of that, and just look at the image of Cage there. He looks serious. This is a definitely a tense story that is going on.
He's not messing around in this story.
Yeah.
So that was like the first thought that I had. And then so I finally like got the call from Marvel, and they said to me, how would you feel about writing a short story for us? I said, of course I'm interested in writing a short story for you guys. Been trying to have this phone call for like the last 20 years.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And so I wrote the short story, and I chose Luke Cage. He felt, as much as I wanted to do a Daredevil story, I kind of wanted to save that for later on. And so I asked what characters were available to me. This was a story that was going to be celebrating, or sorry, an issue of Marvel's Voices that was going to be
Yeah.
celebrating Black History Month.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do Daredevil for Black History Month. So the other character that I was really interested in was Luke Cage. So I came up with a story. This was right around the time that,
Oh, looks like we had a little bit of technical difficulties here. See if we can catch him again. All right, it looks like I lost him. So let me see if I can bring him back. There we
I
go.
am so sorry. My
Oh,
computer, my
no,
Firefox just quits on me. It does it all
no worries.
the time.
No worries. I
Yeah,
had the image up there, so we're okay. So we
covered.
can continue.
Yeah.
So you were
So
talking about the you've got Luke Cage is one of the guys that you could choose to do.
Right. And this had just happened. This is, as I was coming up with the story, like unfortunately George Floyd had just lost his life around that time. It was still very much what was relevant in the news at that point. And the issue of police violence has been one that's been troubling me deeply for several years now. It's always bothered me, needless to say,
Yeah.
but it's really become something that had been affecting me rather deeply. And the cherry on top of that was when George Floyd lost his life. That really brought it all to a head, and I think that brought it all to a head for a lot of people who had been ignoring that issue had been easily ignoring that issue for many years. They were
The whole
no
world.
longer able to do so any longer. And so I wrote this story. Marvel was very gracious in letting me tackle this subject and not censoring me. They wanted me to shave a few edges off here and there, but essentially they allowed me to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And so at a certain point, the story was finished. I figured, it would just get published and hopefully we'd move on to the next thing. And they gave me a call. They said they sent me an email one day and they're like, "Hey, do you have time for a call?" I thought, what could they possibly want to talk to me about? Are they going to fire me? I figured if they want to fire me, they're just going to like do it over an email. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't comprehend what they wanted to discuss. And I thought about it for days, and at no point did it ever occur to me they might want to expand the short story that I'd written, which is in fact what they wanted to do. They said, "We want to take it out of Marvel's voices." And they said, "There's a lot going on here. How would you feel about if we expanded it to like a one shot or a mini series?" Obviously, I'm going to dive on that opportunity.
Yeah.
I said, "Sure." And I was excited to do so because as much as I'd managed to squeeze quite a few ideas into the 4 pages they'd allowed me, but I also knew that there was a lot more, a lot deeper that I could go into that subject matter. So they said, so I immediately, my mind went into overdrive and I started thinking, what could I do with this scenario and this story? And I remembered the Daredevil story that I had wanted to pitch to them, and the editors, I mentioned it sort of vaguely to the editors, and they suggested perhaps there might be some overlap between the two. And I started thinking about that, and in fact there was a lot of overlap between the two. So this story kind of emerged very quickly. I pitched it to them. They were all on board, and it's been great. The script for the first issue was delivered a couple weeks ago at least, and it's going well so far.
Well, that's so good to hear. I like the fact that you said that even though they wanted to change some of the stuff you did, that they weren't censoring you, because I think at this particular moment, it's a subject matter that obviously is going to hit people differently. We would hope that the whole world could see the point and to empathize the point, but for people like yourself and myself, for people of color, this is a very um powerful topic, and a topic, and a point in life that we all have to be cognizant about. And I'm glad to hear Marvel didn't want to tell you to, shall we say, sugarcoat it or change it. But I think more so, I hope that people in reading this will actually get an idea of what it's like, because they're going to hear it and see it through a hero's eyes, like Luke Cage, like, the importance of story to open the eyes of other people who do not live through that situation, right? And I think
Absolutely.
comics have that ability to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's one of the things I'm really excited about getting to work in this particular sandbox. Is that the fact that it's such a well-known and embraced action hero as Luke Cage will allow people to, let their barriers down a little bit and embrace the story, and hopefully they'd be willing to open their ears and their hearts and their minds to some of the other themes that are buried in the subtext. Absolutely.
Exactly.
I
I
mean,
think
please.
Oh no, I was gonna say you used the perfect word, subtext, and let's touch on a little bit. There's there's over the past couple of years, people have been saying, "Oh, comics are too political. Get politics out of comics." But the best comics have always been political. Comics have always been a political statement. So it's the people that don't recognize the statement that comics have been making and the good comics
Yeah.
making. Those are the people that need to see the statement,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, I never understand that. That one that kills me. I've heard that so many times recently where people say, "Don't put your politics into your storytelling. Just tell a good story. Stop trying to feed me an agenda through your storytelling. Just give me a good story." That is a nonsensical statement to me.
Yep.
You know, life is politics. Okay? Like everything is politically based. Who you choose to sleep with, who your friends are, the music you like. There's this political subtext to goddamn
Everything.
everything. All right.
Yep.
So you telling me to divorce, that's like just saying, like, just write stories about complete fluff. Don't give me
Fluff.
any substance at all. Just give me flowers and daisies and candy canes and whatever the hell.
Yep.
And that's all I want to read about. Even something like Star Wars, which was obviously one of the most universally embraced stories ever told, is deeply political.
Is deeply
That is about
political. Yeah.
the Vietnam War. That is about the rise of fascism. All right. That is about specific political things that were going on when George Lucas was creating that story.
Yep.
And he was cagey enough to dress it up in a veneer that people could just see the fantasy aspect of it. But if you take 1 second to pull your face out of your ass, you will see the political subtext
Yep.
very, very prominently and obviously displayed. So when people make statements like that, I just don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah,
What do you want people to write about?
and especially, like I said, they would probably be the same people that have read comics for a long time, but that some of those stories just go over their heads.
Just went
But
over their
that's
head.
the thing. As a storyteller, the things that make the story good is it comes from experience or it comes from knowledge. You have read up on something, you have experienced something, you know somebody who's told you something. That's what makes a story because it's real. And if
Mhm.
our characters do not have any semblance of real grounding them, then like you said, it's all just fluff,
It's
and you
fluff.
will never remember that story years down the road. Like I would probably say one of my favorite stories of Daredevil was Frank Miller when he did the whole Born Again, right? Remember that story? Like Matt Murdock gets taken down. The Kingpin breaks him. There's so much to that is there's drug addiction, there's betrayal, there's all of these different things, and it's real. That's why it resonates. That's why how many years later, not only is that book still selling, but people still drive to it. It's still the backbone of new Daredevil material via Netflix or whatever.
Yeah,
So these
absolutely.
stories have to be told and they have to come from a place of a center to learn and a center and a center to teach those these moments and to show and I'm really looking forward to it because as I've read some of your work, like the way you raise the issues, you're not beating them over the head,
I don't
but
think
you
so.
are putting it out there, and again, below the surface, but readily to be seen. And I think again, I'm looking forward to seeing it on Luke Cage. Luke Cage is that guy who's become a little bit more serious, but he's also, because of Netflix, more people know him. So I hope that this book can reach a greater audience because of that.
I hope so. And the thing is, I another reason I was so attracted to Luke Cage is because he's just like you said, for people of color, especially right now, I feel like he's never had more relevance because here's a man who is invulnerable to bullets. All right, the thing that is wiping out black males predominantly by police, and it's been done so for generations. All right, and this man is invulnerable to that at a time right now where we're so attuned finally to the evils of police brutality. This particular skill set that this guy has, this particular invulnerability that he has, could not be more relevant to people. You know what I mean? Like I feel like he's the perfect hero for right now. So I just sort of like, I just felt like everything that I want, that I try to say, and even just on an action story level, everything I'm trying to do right now is like perfectly encapsulated through this character.
Very cool. So again, man, you're teeing up. You're making this so easy. So you talked about action and the flow of the story, and as I've mentioned, you not only write but you draw as well. So how is this process different for you, where you are now the shall we say the wordsmith? You're not putting your words to pictures. You are now leaving that up to somebody else.
Um, Dude, it's been great. I gotta tell you, it's been great. I love being a writer artist. That's obviously, a great job to have, and it's thrilling. Just, I wanted to be a writer artist when I was a young guy, and I finally like kind of achieved that, and I finally like was able to master my particular skill set to a certain extent. So it's kind of thrilling just to be able to write a script and to visualize it and have the ability to get it published, and that's all cool. On the other hand, though, for a long, long time, I've kind of wanted to sort of move away from being an artist. It's very, very time consuming, backbreaking labor. I love it, but I mean, it'll kind of kill the bot after a while. I have 1,000 ideas, and I don't have enough years in this world to draw all the ideas that I have. And I always just like the idea of being a writer as well. When I was younger, as much as being an artist was of paramount importance to me, I also just really idolized writers. I really idolized David Mamet and Tennessee Williams and August Wilson and just a whole host of writers, Robert Town, and there's just hundreds of writers that I really just loved for their intellectual powerhouse
Mhm.
ness. That's not a word, but I can't come up with the right one. I'm not an intellectual powerhouse, needless to say. But I just really admired that. And also, I just always had this desire to just write comics. I remember I read, I met Brian Azzarello in, I think it was like 2004 or something like that in Barcelona. I forget exactly when. It was a while back. And might have been a little bit later than that. At any rate, I met him and I had this long conversation with him, and remember he was in the he was in like the last third of working on 100 Bullets, which was a comic I loved. And every time I
Perfect
read
comment.
that book, it was a great book. And every time I read that comic, I was always like, I just, as much as I loved what Rizzo was doing, I really loved what Azzarello was doing.
Yes.
I just had this fantasy of him just getting to like write his particular story, getting paid well to write this story that he created and was in love with. And it was just, there was something about the writer's life that I liked. And I always thought my fantasy was just to have my own comic that I could write month in and month out. And so finally just getting an opportunity to, over the last 2 years or so, I've done a lot of writing of comics and not as much drawing. I'm just trying to finish off my comic book Godhead.
Mhm.
So I've done a lot of scripting. I wrote a script that I'm passionate about called The Resurrectionists, the supernatural story set in New York City in the 1800s,
Ooh.
about the people, as the name would suggest, who can raise the dead. And it's which for another artist, a great artist named Jeremy Love, it was thrilling to do. And it's really exciting to sort of dive into the ideas, put them down on the page, and then move on and let a great artist, who's not me, who's got a brain and a point of view outside of myself, let them interpret it and add to it, kind of make it more than the sum of its parts. So it's been really cool. Like there's a project that I would like to write and draw for Marvel. I've sort of talked to them a little bit about. So there's some other stuff I'm going to do down the road as a writer artist, but honestly, I'm kind of happy sort of moving away from the art side of it and focusing more on the words.
That's awesome. So I would be a very, very poor interviewer if I did not bring up the very cool fact that you are also into films
Yes,
and
sir.
make your own film. So how did you get into that, and how does that I'm going to use the word interlace with how with your comic making, progress?
Yes, no, interlace is a great word. For me, it all comes down to visual storytelling, which is, always how I've kind of defined myself if asked. Um, I've said this so many times, I'm going to say it again. It was Star Wars. Star Wars was the thing that put me on this entire path. All right. So it actually didn't begin with comics. It began with films. It began with Star Wars, and it began with a Walt Disney cartoon called Man in Space, which you can find on YouTube. And I still remember a specific part of that cartoon where there's a countdown and then a rocket ship blasts off into the air. And that just tripped wires in my brain when I was a little kid. And then it was Star Wars. And so films were always kind of the first love. Now, comic books followed very swiftly after that. They were kind of in lockstep, but the first step was definitely movies. So, after years of fantasizing about making films and sort of being dissatisfied that I couldn't kind of have my feet in both worlds as much as I loved the one world that I was always in, I just finally said, I'm not getting any younger. Let me just see what happens. And so a partner of mine, my buddy Jerry, we hooked up around 2008, and we started making films together. I wrote and directed a film called The Salesman, about a gun salesman. It was sort of based a little bit on real life events, not my selling guns, but the overall what happened in the story. It was kind of a tragic story. It was based on sort of a real incident, and that really put the bug in me. I thought, you know what, I have to continue to do this. And what I loved about making movies is it's still visual storytelling, but it's collaborative visual storytelling. I can do whatever the hell I want as a cartoonist. I don't have to answer to anybody unless I put myself in that position, like I have with Marvel. But I mean, when I'm working on one of my indie projects like Godhead, nobody's telling me what to do. I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want to do. And if you don't like it, don't buy the comic. But when I get to do cinematic stuff, I'm working with actors, which I love. I'm working with a director of photography, which I love. I'm working with producers, designers. It's fantastic. It's great to, like I said before, something being more than the sum of its parts. It's so great when you get a collection of smart people, and I always surround myself with people who are smarter than me, and they will just elevate they will make it more than anything you could have come up with on your own. And that's so thrilling. And it's also thrilling to, I deal in static images as a cartoonist, and it's great to finally see those images moving. And that kinetic energy that is available through filmmaking is just it's very satisfying. And the other thing that I love about filmmaking is, as a cartoonist, all those transferable skills. I can, I'm still, writing scripts. I'm still drawing storyboards.
Yes.
There's that cartoonist element that's present in there. The other thing that I love is that all the art forms are present in filmmaking: music, dance, the sciences, photography, you name it. The arts and the sciences, they're kind of all encapsulated within films. And the other thing is, as a person who grew up loving superhero comics, and I still love to see them, doing the thing on the page. I just read a shit ton of Chip Zdarsky's comics from his Daredevil run.
Nice.
Myself for Luke Cage, and those comics were so much fun to read. They were just beautifully written, and I think the artist's name is Marco Cicchetto.
Cicchetto, yeah.
He's
solid,
incredible.
Yeah.
I keep using the word thrilling. I'm going to use it again. Those comics are thrilling to read.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, superheroes translate so beautifully to the screen.
Yeah.
The movement, the spectacle of them, and the chance to kind of dive into action, to characterization. They really translate beautifully to the screen. So there's just I just really like, the two art forms really complement each other for me, and I'm just so happy that I get to kind of keep a foot in both fields.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to refer to you as, from now on, as you're going to be the Renaissance man to me. You know how to do so much in the worlds of things that I love, from comic books to novels to movies. You are a visual storyteller. You are a storyteller. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, not only about Luke Cage, which I'm super excited to be coming out, but I hope when the book comes out, or maybe even before, that we can sit down and do this again. It's been super fun, and time and COVID permitting, definitely would love to have you up to the store to do some type of either a meet and greet, or even if it's just, shall we say, a talk, or a little signing when Luke Cage comes out, because man, we haven't met in person yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So I want to say thank you again, Mr.
Thank
Anderson.
you, brother.
And I had to throw Mr. Anderson in there.
I appreciate it so much, man. I thought we were going to talk a lot longer, so this is cool. I get to go.
Oh, we can still go. I can edit, but it's just saying, this has been a powerful half an hour of stuff. I think we got a lot in here for people. So yeah, so maybe we'll leave this for as part 1, and we shall do part 2 with Mr. Hoche Anderson. So I want to say thank you to all of you who have watched this, and if you can remember, please hit that like button, the subscribe button, and also that bell to give you the notifications so you know when all the news drops on Heroes World Online. Thank you so much, and have a great night.